My name is Vicki J. Jennings, and I'm 33 years old. There are some things in life you think you'll never have to spell out for your own family, like maybe don't treat the lake house I bought for mom and dad like your personal Airbnb. But apparently I was wrong, wildly and humiliatingly wrong. I have no kids. I've never been married, and that part matters because it's the reason my family has always assumed my life is flexible, disposable, and available for whatever crisis they need solved. I've done pretty well for myself. Not because I got lucky, but because I built a software consultancy from scratch and kept it running through years of grinding, brutal failures, and enough caffeine to kill a small horse. And eventually, it paid off. I bought a loft downtown. I travel when I want. And most recently, I gave my parents the one gift I'd dreamed about since college: a lake house that felt like a thank you, big enough to match the weight of what they gave me when I had nothing but a busted laptop and a $6 domain name. This wasn't a fixer-upper or some moldy shack with spiders the size of your hand. This place was gorgeous. Cedarwood siding, wraparound porch, private dock, and the kind of sunrises that make you feel like you're standing inside a painting. The first time I walked through it, I could already picture my mom with a mug of tea on the porch, my dad reading in a chair, pretending he wasn't about to fall asleep to the sound of crickets. I bought it outright, and when I handed them the keys, my mother cried real ugly tears, the kind she normally hides behind jokes. She hugged me so hard, I thought my ribs would snap. My dad just kept nodding and saying, "You shouldn't have, kiddo. You really shouldn't have," like he didn't believe it was real. For a while, everything was perfect. They moved in late spring, just after their 40th anniversary, and I told them I didn't want anything back. No rent, no strings, just enjoy it. Fish, read, sit on the porch, fall asleep to the sound of water. I visited a couple of weekends that summer, brought steaks and wine, helped my dad set up his new smoker, even installed a surround sound system in the living room so they could blast their jazz records and annoy the birds. Watching them settle into peace felt like watching a version of my childhood finally get rewarded, and for a minute I let myself believe I'd done something that could only bring us closer. Then things got weird, and at first it was so small I didn't want to admit it mattered. Missed calls. My mom would text, "Sorry, we've been hard to reach, it's been so busy here," and I'd read that and frown because busy in retirement doesn't make sense unless something is wrong. My dad stopped answering his phone entirely. When I called their landline, someone would pick up and hang up immediately. I told myself it was the lake signal, the distance, the old phone, anything that didn't require me to imagine my parents avoiding me. But the pattern kept repeating, and the unease started to sharpen. Around the same time, my sister Rachel began sending me messages that sounded like concern but felt like bait. Rachel is complicated. She's 36, married to Kyle, a man who believes he's the next Elon Musk because he flips NFTs and once sold a startup idea to a hedge fund that, fun fact, never launched. They live in the suburbs with their twin boys, and ever since Rachel became a mom, she's had this matriarch now energy that drives everyone up a wall. She talks to my parents like they're fragile toddlers and talks to me like I'm an employee who forgot to clock in. Ever since I bought the lake house, she'd been dropping passive-aggressive comments that always landed just a little too sharp. "It must be nice to have enough money to play Santa Claus," she'd say, or, "Gifts like that come with expectations, you know." At first I brushed it off as jealousy, because Rachel has always hated being outshined in a way she can't control. But then she started texting me things like, "You should check in on mom and dad, they've been acting different lately," and, "Don't you think it's weird they haven't invited you back?" I told myself she was stirring up drama because Rachel loves poking a hornet's nest and acting shocked when she gets stung. But even so, something about her timing felt off, like she was planting seeds. Then a family friend, Mr. Halbert, called me out of the blue. He's this sweet older guy who used to fish with my dad, the kind of man who still says things like honey and kiddo without it sounding fake. He sounded confused when he spoke. "Vicky," he said, "I went up to the lake last weekend, but your folks weren't there." He paused, then added, "Strange thing is, there were kids' toys all over the porch, and some young man in a robe drinking whiskey told me your parents were traveling." He hesitated like he didn't want to offend me, then said, "Didn't seem too friendly." My stomach dropped so fast I felt nauseous. Kids' toys, a young man in a robe, my dad's robe. That wasn't a retirement quiet week. That was someone living in their space, and my parents being gone without telling me. That's when I decided to drive up there. No text, no warning. I threw an overnight bag in the trunk, grabbed a bottle of wine I'd been saving for my dad, and made the 2-hour drive with my jaw clenched so hard I gave myself a headache. I remember thinking there had to be an explanation. Maybe they loaned it to friends. Maybe Rachel was watching the place. Maybe the Palmers from their college days were visiting. But even as I tried to soothe myself, the closer I got, the more that gut feeling turned into a cold certainty. I pulled into the gravel driveway around noon on a Friday in late September. The trees were exploding in color, fiery reds and golds and oranges, and it should have been beautiful. Instead, all I saw was the unfamiliar car in the driveway, a big black Escalade, Kyle's, like a signature on a deed he didn't own. I saw the grill still smoking on the porch and my dad's favorite robe hanging off the shoulders of a man I hadn't seen in months. Kyle was barefoot, drinking my dad's expensive whiskey straight from a tumbler like he was royalty. I stood there holding my bag, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, and Kyle didn't even flinch when he noticed me. He just raised his glass toward me like he was toasting a deal. "Well, well," he said, grinning. "Look who decided to show up." I swallowed hard, the wine bottle suddenly feeling ridiculous in my hand. "Where are my parents?" Kyle took a slow, theatrical sip. "Left weeks ago," he said. "Something about visiting friends down south. Didn't say when they'd be back." "They didn't tell me," I said, and my voice sounded too controlled, like my body was holding rage behind a locked door. Kyle shrugged. "Maybe they forgot. Old age, you know how it is." I dropped my bag on the porch hard enough to make the sound echo through the trees. "Get out," I said. He laughed. Actually laughed. "Come on, Vicky. Don't be dramatic. We're just watching the place. Rachel said it was fine." "You have 10 minutes," I said, stepping up onto the first stair, and I watched the grin slip as he saw something in my face he hadn't expected, something I wasn't even fully aware of until that moment. Then from inside the house, I heard a kid scream laughing, the kind of sound that belongs to children who feel safe in a place. The twins were playing Mario Kart on the TV I installed, and that's when I realized this wasn't a visit. They'd moved in. I didn't go inside right away. I needed a second to breathe, to think, to keep myself from doing something reckless, like grabbing Kyle by the collar and dragging him off the porch. My fists were clenched so tightly my nails cut into my palms, and the whole scene felt surreal, like I'd pulled into the wrong driveway and stumbled into someone else's nightmare. This was supposed to be my parents' sanctuary, their quiet place, their reward. Instead, it smelled like grilled hot dogs and spilled whiskey, and the porch furniture looked used in the way furniture looks when someone stops treating a place like home and starts treating it like a free hotel. Kyle watched me with the lazy confidence of a man who has never been told no in a way that matters. I stared at him and asked again, slower this time, "Where are my parents?" His eyes flicked away for the first time, and that tiny break in his arrogance told me more than any answer could. He muttered, "They left us a note, like it was a magic shield. Said we could stay as long as we wanted." I stepped closer until I was inches from him. "Did they write that note to you?" I asked, "or did you write it yourself?" Kyle didn't answer. His smirk was gone now, replaced by a tight jaw and an irritated swallow. Behind him, I could still hear the video game sounds and the squeal of the twins, and that was when it hit me in the gut. This wasn't an afternoon visit. This was residency, the kind you establish with toys and routines and entitlement. I turned away from Kyle before I did something I couldn't undo and walked down the steps, circling the gravel driveway like an animal trying to find the edge of a trap. The lawn hadn't been mowed in weeks. The flower pots my mom carefully arranged along the front steps were dead, cracked soil and brittle brown leaves. One tipped over completely like someone kicked it aside without thinking. The grill was still warm. A half-empty bag of charcoal sat open on the deck. My parents' wind chimes, the ones I bought as a housewarming gift, were tangled and quiet, like even the air didn't know how to behave in a place that had been stolen. When I stepped back onto the porch, I didn't knock. I yanked open the front door. Inside, the house was alive with noise. Video games blaring from the living room, a child shouting something about blue shells, the microwave beeping insistently. And over it all, Rachel's voice, casual and sharp, yelling from the kitchen, "Kyle, can you tell Lucas to stop screaming? And don't forget we need more eggs." I froze in the foyer. The Lakehouse had an open concept layout, which meant I could see almost everything at once, and what I saw made my stomach twist. The living room couch was covered in crumbs and rumpled blankets. The dining table was stacked with school books, laundry, and half-eaten bowls of cereal. Shoes were piled by the fireplace like it was a rental cabin after a ski trip. My parents' framed anniversary photo had been moved to a side table behind clutter. My surround sound system was on full volume, and the TV showed the exact Mario Kart track I knew my dad used to laugh at when I tested the system. Rachel stood in the kitchen barefoot, wearing one of my mother's aprons, flipping pancakes like she owned the place. When she turned mid-flip and saw me, she didn't gasp. She didn't look startled. She just blinked once and said, "Oh, you're here." "You're here," I repeated, and my voice didn't even sound like mine, more like someone else borrowing my mouth. Rachel shrugged, as if I'd surprised her at a grocery store. "We've been staying here for a few weeks, Tess," she said. "Didn't Mom tell you?" "No," I said flatly. "Huh," she replied, turning back to the pan like the conversation wasn't urgent. "Well, I'm sure it just slipped her mind. She was in a rush when they left." She slid pancakes onto a plate, unbothered, and that calmness made a cold fear crawl up my spine. Calm people are calm when they know they're safe. Calm people are calm when the plan is working. "Where are they?" I asked, and I took a step forward, needing to see her eyes. Rachel hesitated for a second. It was subtle, but it was there, a tiny pause, a flicker of calculation, and then she said, "South Carolina, I think, or maybe Georgia by now. They wanted to visit the mountains. They're doing a little road trip with the Palmers." "They didn't tell me they were going anywhere," I said. Rachel lifted her shoulders. "Maybe if you called more often." My jaw clenched. "I called," I snapped. Dozens of times. I texted, I emailed. She didn't flinch. She turned, fork in hand, and asked, "You sound really worked up. Want some breakfast?" That was the moment I realized something was deeply wrong. Not just the lies. Not just the silence. Something worse. Rachel wasn't scrambling to explain. She wasn't nervous. She was confident, comfortable, like this had been planned. And the only risk was me showing up earlier than expected. "I want to talk to Mom now," I said. "Like I said," Rachel replied, "she's on the road, so call her." I tried. "I don't think she has service," she said. And then she pulled out her phone like she was performing a demonstration, tapped around, and showed me the screen as the call went straight to voicemail. "Told you." She set the phone down and started cutting pancakes for one of the twins, who wandered in and plopped into a chair like this was their kitchen, like this was their home. The boy didn't even look at me. He just reached for syrup. That's when I started noticing details I hadn't wanted to see at first. Toys in the corners, extra cereal boxes stacked in the pantry, school permission slips on the table, a sticky note on the garage door labeled Kyle's toolbox. My dad's tools, the ones he cherished like extensions of his hands, were gone from the workbench. The master bedroom door was closed. I walked toward it anyway. Rachel's voice sharpened behind me. "Vicky, don't be dramatic." I opened the door. Inside, the bed was unmade. The closet looked ransacked. My mother's jewelry box was missing. My father's pipe rack was gone. Instead, there were piles of Rachel and Kyle's clothes, her makeup scattered on the vanity, like she'd been living there long enough to stop packing it away. A Target bag stuffed with men's socks sat beside the dresser. The smell in the room was different too. Not my parents' familiar soap and cedar, but a mix of cheap cologne and hair products. I backed out slowly and returned to the kitchen, my heart thudding like it wanted to break through my ribs. "Where are their things?" I asked. Rachel looked at me like I was embarrassing her. "In storage, I think," she said. "Mom said we could make ourselves comfortable. They didn't want us living in that cramped townhouse forever. The boys needed space." "You put their stuff in storage," I said, and my voice shook on the last word. "They did," Rachel corrected quickly. "I helped. It was rushed, but they agreed." Kyle leaned in from the living room doorway, still holding the whiskey tumbler, and said, "Your parents wanted this, Vicky. They said it was time. Time for the house to be used by people who actually need it." I stared at him, then at Rachel. "I want to see the note," I said. Rachel's smile didn't waver, but something in her eyes flickered. "What note?" "The note Kyle just referenced," I said. "The one that says you can stay as long as you want. Show me." Rachel set the spatula down slowly. "I don't have it," she said. "Mom took it with her." Of course she did. I stood there, breathing through my nose, trying to find a crack in their story, a slip, anything that sounded human. But they were too smooth, too rehearsed. "I didn't eat," I didn't speak to the twins. I walked out and got in my car and drove until I found cell service, and then I tried everything. I called my parents' numbers, both cell and landline, every hour. No answer. I left voicemails that got progressively less controlled. I emailed. I even messaged them through Facebook, something I hadn't done since 2015. Nothing. Then I tried the Palmers, my mom's friends from college. They hadn't seen her in months. That detail punched the breath out of me. I tried Aunt Susan, Uncle Jeremy, even my old high school English teacher who randomly ran into my parents at a farmer's market once and still sends them Christmas cards. No one had heard from them. It was like they'd vanished. 2 days later, I drove back to the city and stopped by their old condo. Locked, empty, flyers stuffed in the mailbox. I peeked through the windows. Dusty floors. No furniture. It had been cleared out. I went to the front desk. The guy on duty remembered them and said he hadn't seen them since early August. He said a moving truck came one morning and they were gone by evening. He said it like it was nothing, like families don't disappear. I finally lost it in the parking lot. I sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel, trying to figure out what reality I was in. Had they really left without telling me? Had they really handed the house over to Rachel and Kyle without even a heads up? I started thinking back, searching for clues. Mom's odd texts, Dad going quiet, Rachel's weird tone anytime the Lakehouse came up. Maybe they felt guilty. Maybe Rachel guilted them into thinking she deserved it more. Maybe they were sick of feeling indebted. Or maybe they didn't leave at all. That thought chilled me more than anything else, and it followed me home like a shadow I couldn't shake. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I lay on my couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation from the past 6 months, every moment where something felt slightly off, and I convinced myself it was nothing. The hugs when I gave them the keys, my mom's tears, my dad's quiet pride, the way Rachel stood off to the side in every photo, lips pressed together like she was swallowing something bitter. At the time, I told myself it was jealousy, a mood, just Rachel being Rachel. Now I wasn't so sure. I tried again in the morning. I called my parents' phones at breakfast, at lunch, at dinner, straight to voicemail every time. I sent emails that started calm and ended desperate. I even messaged them through Facebook, something I hadn't done in years. Still nothing. My phone, which used to buzz constantly with pictures of sunsets at the lake or random questions about the grill, was silent. It felt like someone had reached into my life and muted it. 2 days later, a letter arrived at my apartment. No return address. Just my name typed neatly on the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed. No handwriting, no signature. Vicky, we're fine. We needed some time to ourselves. Don't worry about us. The house is in good hands. Rachel and Kyle will take care of it. Please don't try to contact us right now. We need space. Love, Mom and Dad. I read it once, then again, then a third time, slower, hunting for something hidden between the lines. A code, a plea. Anything that sounded like the parents I knew. It wasn't there. The words were flat, controlled, almost clinical. It didn't sound like my mom, who always over-explained. It didn't sound like my dad, who never typed anything longer than 2 sentences. It sounded curated. I sat on the floor with the letter in my hands for hours. Were they coerced into writing it? Had Rachel convinced them I was unstable? Had Kyle filled their heads with stories about me being controlling or resentful or dangerous? Or did they really believe this was easier, disappearing instead of facing me? The not knowing was worse than any answer. That was when my life started to unravel in quiet ways. Work suffered. I missed deadlines. I canceled meetings. I told clients I was dealing with a personal situation, which was true, but didn't come close to explaining the hollow panic sitting in my chest. I stopped going to the gym. I lived on takeout. Dirty dishes piled up in the sink like evidence I was avoiding my own life. For the first time in a decade, I thought about quitting everything, selling my loft, starting over somewhere no one knew my name. What finally stopped me wasn't strength, it was exhaustion. The turning point came from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Rob. We'd been roommates during my first startup job back when I was eating instant noodles and surviving on 3 hours of sleep. He moved to Seattle, started a family, got out of the tech rat race. We drifted. But somehow he saw an Instagram story I posted without thinking, just a picture of the lake from last summer with the caption, "Not what it used to be." He called me that night. "You alive?" he asked. "Barely. You look like you got hit by a freight train. I kind of did, and I told him everything: the house, the silence, Rachel, the letter, the feeling that my entire family had been hollowed out and rearranged while I was left standing outside watching through the windows. He didn't interrupt. When I finally stopped talking, he said something that hit harder than any advice. You never let anyone tell you who you were, he said, not even when you were broke. Don't let this define you. I don't know who I am without them, I admitted. Then it's time to figure that out. That night, I opened a notebook I hadn't touched since high school and started writing. Just a few lines at first. They took the house, they took the silence, but they don't get to take me. It wasn't poetry, it was survival. The next morning, I made a list. Not a war plan, a recovery plan. I called my clients and apologized. Some were understanding, some weren't. The ones that mattered stayed. I hired a trainer and started running again, slow and awkward, but moving. I cooked real food. I went back to therapy and told the whole story to someone who didn't have a stake in defending anyone else. And slowly the fog lifted, but the house still haunted me. 3 months after that first confrontation, I drove back to the lake late one night, not to confront Rachel, not to knock on the door, just to see it. I parked across the road, hidden by trees, and watched the lights flicker through the windows like a stranger peeking into someone else's life. There was a wreath on the door, Christmas lights on the railing, a child's bike leaning against the shed. My dock was covered in frost. I sat there for an hour. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just watched. And I realized something that settled deep and cold in my chest. They didn't deserve it. The house wasn't just a structure. It was my effort, my love, my belief that family meant something sacred. Rachel had turned it into a power grab, and my parents had allowed it, whether out of fear, guilt, or exhaustion. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight out of spite. I was going to reclaim what was mine with precision. Not loudly, not emotionally. Legally. The morning after I made that decision, the lake was shrouded in fog, a low gray mist curling over the water like the house itself was holding its breath. It felt right in a way I couldn't explain, not because I wanted drama, but because some endings deserve weather. I didn't rush. That was the difference this time. The old version of me would have kicked down the front door, slapped a deed on the table, and demanded everyone get out. The woman I was becoming understood that real power doesn't show up shouting. It waits, watches, sharpens. The first step was control, not emotional control, legal control. The deed was still in my name. I'd bought the Lakehouse outright. No mortgage, no liens, no co-signers. I'd even filed the property taxes under my LLC for accounting purposes, a detail Rachel either didn't know or assumed wouldn't matter. It mattered. In the eyes of the county and the IRS, I wasn't a generous daughter who'd lost control of a gift. I was the sole legal owner of a property being occupied without permission. I scheduled a consultation with a real estate attorney named Eliza, recommended by a friend who'd survived a brutal property dispute with a former business partner. Eliza was calm, incisive, and had a way of listening that made me feel steadier just by speaking. When I told her I wanted my house back, she didn't blink. "Do they have a written lease?" she asked. "No." "Written permission from your parents to let them stay," she continued. "Nothing I've seen." "And the letter you received," she said, tapping her pen, "there's no signature, no address, no proof it came from them." She leaned back and nodded slowly. "That helps." Eliza walked me through the process step by step. Because Rachel and Kyle were family, the law would move slower than I wanted, but it would move. Formal demand to vacate. Unlawful detainer if they ignored it. Court hearing. Possession. Clean. Boring. Effective. I left her office with a checklist and something I hadn't felt in months. Direction. While Eliza prepared the paperwork, I went to work building a case, not out of revenge, but necessity. I hired a private investigator, a soft-spoken man named Vince who carried himself like someone who'd seen enough mess to know better than to judge. For 2 weeks, he parked near the Lakehouse, logged times, recorded footage, and took notes. What he found was worse than I expected. Kyle had turned the Lakehouse into a part-time rental. Nothing official, no listings, just quiet weekend getaways arranged through text and Venmo. Vince caught it all. Different cars rolling in on Friday nights. Groups of friends unloading coolers and Bluetooth speakers. Kyle giving tours on the deck, saying things like, "Yeah, it's our family place." Been in the family for years. My wife's sister bought it for our parents, but they handed it down to us when they got too old to manage it. Handed it down. Rachel had enrolled the twins in the local school district using the Lakehouse address. Mail had been redirected. Utilities were switched into her name, which she probably thought made her look legitimate. In reality, it made my case airtight. They weren't visiting. They were establishing residency in a property they didn't own. I drafted a letter to my parents. Not a text, not a voicemail, a printed letter on thick paper with a wax seal, something serious enough to demand attention. I didn't threaten, I warned. Mom, Dad, it began. I know you asked for space. I've given you that. I haven't shown up. I haven't forced contact. But you need to understand something. The lake house is mine. You accepted it in good faith, but you never gave Rachel permission to live there, and you never told me you were leaving. Kyle is lying. Rachel is lying, and I have proof. I listed nothing specific. I didn't need to. I told them Rachel and Kyle were trespassing, renting the property for cash, and dragging the family name through the mud. I asked them to make it right before I did. I mailed copies to their old condo, the address on their driver's licenses, and the P.O. box I remembered from years of sending birthday cards. 2 weeks passed, no response. But I knew they'd read it. On the third Sunday of the month, Vince sent me a blurry photo taken from across the road. A silver Prius parked near the lake house. My mother behind the wheel, engine running. She sat there for several minutes, watching the house, then drove away without getting out. It broke something in me and mended something else at the same time. She knew. They both did. They just weren't ready to face it. The legal notices were served a week later, 30 days to vacate. Kyle took the envelope from the process server, glanced at it like it was junk mail, and tossed it onto the porch without opening it. Vince captured the whole thing on video. That same night, I reclaimed control of the smart home system I'd installed months earlier. Thermostat, exterior lights, garage access, all still registered under my account. I didn't shut the house down. I nudged it. The porch heater stopped working. The exterior lights went dark. The garage door refused to open remotely. Inconvenient, not illegal. Rachel texted me that night. Hey, something's wrong with the Wi-Fi. Can you fix it? I didn't reply. A week later, Kyle emailed me. Not sure what you're trying to do here, but this isn't a good look. If you want to talk like adults, we're open to discussing a buyout. We've really made the place our home. A buyout. He wanted me to pay them to leave my own house. That was when I knew I had them exactly where I wanted them. Comfortable, entitled, blind. The last piece came from the town clerk's office. I was double-checking records when I ran into Mr. Halbert, my dad's old fishing buddy. He looked surprised to see me. Thought you'd vanished, he said. Not quite, I replied, then asked the question I'd been carrying for months. Have you seen my parents? He shifted uncomfortably. August, he said. They came by one night needing boxes. Said they had to clear out fast. Your dad looked exhausted. Asked me not to tell anyone, especially you. Especially me. As I left the office, the truth settled heavy and cold. Rachel hadn't just taken the house. She'd taken the story. She'd made my parents afraid or ashamed to face me. That wasn't something I could yell away. It was something I would end. The eviction notice expired on a Tuesday, quiet and unremarkable, which felt fitting for the end of something that had stolen so much oxygen from my life. I'd given them the full 30 days, then 3 extra out of caution, not kindness. I wanted it airtight. I wanted it boring on paper and devastating in reality. They didn't leave. Instead, Kyle got bolder. 2 days after the deadline, Vince sent me a screenshot from a local classifieds board. Exclusive weekend getaways, the listing read. Luxury family lake house. Private dock. Unforgettable views. The photos were unmistakable. My dock, my porch, my drone shot from the day I surprised my parents with the keys. The image that once made me feel proud now repurposed as bait. Kyle was charging cash, bragging about a family property he didn't own, rewriting the story with every booking. That was it. I called Eliza and said, let's do it. She didn't ask me to calm down. She didn't suggest mediation. She simply filed the unlawful detainer action with the court, backed by months of documentation, footage, utility records, school enrollment forms, Venmo screenshots, and sworn statements. Rachel and Kyle didn't even show up to the hearing. Maybe they thought family would protect them. Maybe they thought I'd blink. The judge didn't hesitate. Possession was awarded to me in full. The sheriff scheduled the eviction for Friday morning. I didn't tell Rachel. I didn't tell Kyle. I didn't owe them a warning beyond the law. The morning of the eviction, the lake was wrapped in fog so thick it looked staged, like a movie set waiting for actors to hit their marks. At 6:43 a.m., my phone buzzed with smart home notifications. Front door unlocked. Living room motion detected. Garage opened. They were scrambling. I arrived at the driveway just after 9. The sheriff's cruiser was already there, engine idling. The front door stood open. Rachel was on the porch, red-faced and furious, shouting at Kyle, who was dragging a suitcase down the steps with one hand and a broken lamp in the other. The twins sat in the back seat of the Escalade, eyes glued to an iPad, cartoons blaring loud enough to drown out the shouting. I parked at the edge of the drive and stepped out slowly. I wore a clean black coat, nothing dramatic, nothing symbolic, just myself. Rachel saw me and froze. Her mouth opened like she had a script ready, but no words came out, so I spoke first. Morning. You didn't have to do this, she said, voice shaking with anger and something close to panic. You could have just talked to us. I tried, I replied calmly. You lied. This was Mom and Dad's house, she snapped. They gave it to us. No, I said, I gave it to them. And they never gave it to you. Kyle stepped forward, chest puffed like he could still bully his way out. You're really doing this, he said. To your own sister, your nephews. You rented out a house you didn't own, I said, meeting his eyes. You committed fraud. You trespassed. You don't get to use family as a shield anymore. The sheriff cleared his throat gently, a reminder that this wasn't a debate. Rachel's eyes flicked to him, searching for sympathy. There was none. She knew then. She'd lost. They had 20 minutes to finish loading. They didn't do it gracefully. Boxes were slammed. Drawers yanked. At one point, Rachel threw a pile of blankets onto the gravel like she was trying to make a statement, but there was no audience, no crowd, just fog, silence, and consequences. When the Escalade finally reversed down the driveway, the twins stared at me through the rear window. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just watched them disappear between the trees. And then it was mine again. I walked inside after the sheriff left. The house was a mess. Crumbs ground into the floor, broken blinds, crayon marks on the walls. But instead of rage, I felt relief, the kind that settles deep in your bones. I stood in the center of the living room, closed my eyes, and listened. No video games, no shouting, just the lake breathing outside. For the first time in months, it felt like home. The fallout didn't explode the way Rachel had promised. It unraveled quietly. That weekend, Aunt Susan called me in tears. I had no idea, she kept saying. Rachel told us you went cold, that you kicked everyone out and vanished. When I walked her through the timeline, calmly, fact by fact, she went silent. She lied, Susan whispered, more to herself than to me. The Palmers emailed next. They'd heard the same story and believed it. When I sent them the evidence, they were stunned. They promised to reach out to my parents and tell them what they knew now. I didn't chase my parents. I didn't show up. I let the truth travel without me pushing it. Weeks passed, then a month, then another. One snowy morning in February, I found a card in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a single note. You were right. We're sorry. We're still figuring out what we let happen, but we're proud of you. Love, Mom and Dad. I stood on my porch with snow soaking into my boots and let myself feel it. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the damage, but it was real, and it was enough to let me breathe. That spring, I hired a contractor to restore the Lakehouse. New flooring, fresh paint, repairs done slowly, properly. I kept one thing exactly as it was. The old oak dining table, scarred and stained from years of meals and spilled drinks. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. Around that time, my boyfriend Mark moved in for the weekends. He'd been there through the worst of it, steady and quiet, never telling me what to do, just reminding me who I was when I forgot. One night, sitting on the porch as the sun dropped behind the water, he said, "You didn't just take back a house, you took back your name." He was right. I didn't sell the place, I didn't rent it out, I kept it. Not as a trophy, as a boundary, as proof that generosity doesn't mean surrender and love doesn't mean erasing yourself. When I stand on that porch now, the lake is still calm. The air still smells like pine and water, but the silence feels different. It feels earned,